pass it to Michele.
Okay, awesome. So good morning, everybody. My name is Michele Thornton, and I am this year's Accessibility Fellow Coordinator. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Business, and I was part of the first cohort of fellows in 2019. I'm going to be talking about my key takeaway from that time, and that was a slight, I think, deviation from some of the things that we've been talking about during the 10-day accessibility challenge. We've been focused really solely on content creation and to some degree incorporating accessibility into our teaching practices. And I am going to start scratching the surface on another piece of this, and that is how to think about accessibility in terms of our research agenda. And some of the things that I've done, as well as some of the collaborations that I've worked on with Rebecca, and some things that she's been doing in this space. And so we're going to kind of share some of our experiences and the ways that we've tried to align, I think, our interests in accessibility, creating a culture around accessibility, as well as some of the sort of intellectual pursuits that we've been doing on the research side. So with that, Rebecca, I don't know if you want anything to introduce yourself or just kind of add to the that general intro before we get going with slides.
We should just make sure we address that folks might have signed up for a Kat Blake session and she was unable to come. So this is a last minute fill-in of a different fellow perspective, but also a fellow takeaway.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That's an important point that I failed to address.
In case anyone's confused.
Right, like why you're hearing from me and not somebody else. Okay, so let me go ahead. I'm going to pull up my slides. Okay. All right. So hopefully everyone, can we get a thumbs up? Rebecca, can you see them okay?
Yep, looks good.
Great. All right, so I'm going to kind of talk about this in a handful of different ways. First, just kind of the basics of how we might want to document and share our experiences on our accessibility journey, thinking about ways to build new collaborations across campus, connecting to and leveraging other campus programs, whether that's funding or support by working with different departments or students, and then talk about why I really see this as a space for some novel contributions, which is something that I think as scholars that we're always looking for. So first and foremost, I think that it's important to recognize that a lot of the work that we're doing is unique. First of all, to our knowledge, the Accessibility Fellow program itself, but not just that, even things like this 10-day accessibility challenge that we're participating in, that is unique to our campus. And those experiences we've been recognizing along the way should be documented, shared, and hopefully, kind of broadening the reach and the scope of the impact that we're doing beyond our own campus. So whether that is within your discipline, talking about the fact that you participated in a fellowship program and how that changed your experience or your perceptions of accessibility, that is something that for example, many conferences that are discipline specific are not talking about. So there's some opportunities there, even thinking about publishing some perspectives, articles, and something to that extent might be an interesting opportunity. We've also tried to kind of seek out and pay attention to ways to gather some new data. So for us, that meant beginning a multi-year survey on faculty perceptions around accessibility. Because there's so many initiatives going into play on campus here, it was important for us to try and assess what the impact of that was. And one way to really start that is just to try and get a baseline and understand where, for starters, faculty members were at, what they knew about accessibility, what they knew about our resources. So Rebecca and I did launch a survey last May to try and kind of do that initial baseline. We were able to get just about 100 participants in that first survey, and we will be doing a follow-up on that later this year as well. Rebecca, you've also done something similar to that with regards to gathering new data in students. Can you just share a little bit about, that wasn't survey data, you were doing interviews, correct?
Yep, I did. I'm collaborating with a colleague at Geneseo Amy Fisk, and we have conducted 40 interviews of Geneseo and Oswego students who are registered with the disability offices on either campus about their experiences with remote learning and online learning. And we're hoping to be able to start sharing those results out really soon. We're almost done with the qualitative analysis. We didn't expect to have 40 interviews, so slowed us down a little bit, but we're almost done. So yeah, I had that opportunity as well. And so that's been a really great opportunity to see through student lenses, because we tend not to ask them what their experience was like, especially students with disabilities.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. And that really like bleeds into like kind of this next idea. We're all learning sort of new tools, tricks, tips to use in our classrooms. And that to me screams as a way to sort of do a pedagogical paper to look at the impact of those changes that you're making. So perhaps you teach multiple sessions of the same course, and maybe you begin incorporating some accessibility principles, content activities, things like that into course A, and compare how your overall student outcomes look at the end of the semester with compared against course B, which you didn't quite make those changes yet. So anytime we're trying out something new in class, that is an opportunity for us to not only describe what we're doing, but also assess the impact of that. Rebecca, there was something specifically that you did in this space. Do you want to share that example?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to get a Teach Access grant, which are really wonderful industry funded grant opportunities for faculty who want to incorporate teaching accessibility into their classes and start building it into their disciplines. And I was able to do this in graphic design and develop some additional resources and materials for my web design students. I was already teaching accessibility, but I expanded it with pre and post tests. And actually the test that we used for my kind of student research, we ended up using as our kind of faculty, as a base for some of our faculty research as well.
I think we've alluded to this already, but I think an underlying theme is the opportunity to build new collaborations. So my time as a fellow, I was introduced to, at that point in time, I was only in my second year on campus. And I was introduced to people from all kinds of disciplines across campus, as well as different offices and other, kind of organizations across campus that I was not familiar with and wasn't sure kind of who was interested in working in this space. And that I think anytime you start talking about bringing people together from different areas, thinking about the same topic, it can create some interesting questions about how those two things might mash up together and look in terms of the research space. Towards the end of our presentation, Rebecca and I will share an example of exactly how we did that together and how that came about over a cup of coffee. But the point is that I think that having these different perspectives at the table, I think really allowed for some interesting sort of creative thought in that space. And while most of my focus has happened on SUNY Oswego's campus, I know that Rebecca, as she just mentioned, has extended that beyond as well to think about partnerships and collaborations outside. She just mentioned with the professor at Geneseo, but in terms of thinking about SUNY-wide or our colleagues in our own discipline that we are already working with in other projects, thinking about incorporating accessibility into that as well.
We certainly had quite a few fellows that have presented at conferences within their discipline about things that they've done in their classes, or just even generally bringing up accessibility as an issue. A couple of examples include Sandy Barganier, did stuff at a conference on teaching related to teaching in her field. And then Allison Rank, who is involved in a lot of civic engagement things, has brought this to the forefront of a lot of discussions about civic engagement in higher ed, and has really brought this to a wide range of both kind of faculty, staff, and community kind of engagement conferences.
So this next slide is thinking about how we are able to access and think about some of the other grant or program offerings on campus and connect them to the work that we're doing. And there's certainly a couple of examples here. I think that we all know that we do have the Office of Accessibility Resources who works directly with students. I have to imagine that they were involved in Rebecca's study in terms of identifying students to work with and interview for her project. But Rebecca and I also had a great experience working with the Office for Institutional Research in terms of getting support for sampling faculty members and doing some demographic work on that piece of it. I want to highlight really thinking about some different opportunities. We in the School of Business received a TIP grant to do a one-button video creation studio, and that was happening right at the same time that I was a fellow. And so I was not involved in that TIP grant at all, but once I heard that that was happening, we used the rollout of that studio as a way to also roll out education around captioning and making those videos more accessible. So we kind of pulled together those two initiatives, my work as an accessibility fellow and that kind of funding that had come in through the department around technology to kind of use that as a way to promote accessibility within the School of Business. But I do think even just using TIP grants to identify new technology to use in some of these and test out in courses, I think that is another interesting space for TIP grants. There is all kinds of funding across campus to enhance our work with students and to try and compensate them for their work in this space. And whether that is, all of us, we hear doing more research and immediately start to get stressed out about the workload associated with that. So taking advantage of undergraduate research, like the RISE scholarship for undergraduate research assistants to assist, or the Faculty Student Challenge Grant, which is what Rebecca and I ultimately worked on together this past summer with 2 students, which I will tell you a little bit more about here. And before I get to that, though, I think that what we've learned is that students are interested in this topic as well. We had a great response to student participation in the 10-day challenge. The kinds of things that they're talking about is that they know that learning about this could be a differentiator for them when they are on the job market, as well as just giving them experience that they're maybe not getting in classes. So I think that we're seeing that across a variety of different fields for students, and we expect that there's going to be greater interest in this. I'm not sure, the last point, Rebecca, you wanted to share something about the Right Way series?
Yeah, so many of you may be familiar with the Right Way series, which is kind of a weekly Friday afternoon workshop for students on some writing topic. And I have consistently done workshops with students on writing more accessibly as part of that series. And I was always surprised at how many people came, right? Obviously some faculty, provide extra credit and things for attending those things, but a lot of the students that were there were deeply engaged and asked really great questions. So I think that just attests to how much students are hungry for this. They don't know they're hungry for it because they don't know about it, right? But when you start introducing it to them, they're very open to the conversations around accessibility. And then some of them really latch on and get really excited and want to know a lot more.
And I think, kind of this last point is that this is an emerging field of research study, not so much disability studies, which has, I think, a long history, but this idea of being proactive around accessibility and building a culture around it on a campus is a little bit more novel. And it certainly is something that I think many of us can think about our own disciplines, is not talked about in a way that's inclusive across our disciplines. Oftentimes, my training is in public health. And so public health conferences might have a disability section, but that is very siloed, and it is not necessarily woven through the broader landscape of that discipline. And I think as a result, the information that we're learning, that we're talking about, that we are trying to share across campus needs some additional mainstream outlets. And so I think that thinking about how this could come into play with research, I think, is a really good way to do that. And the final point that I want to make about this is that I think that as we're thinking about developing projects like that, exploring those research questions, that it's really important for us to think about how to include the voices and the experiences of people that actually come from a wide variety of ability statuses, so that we are not sort of I think taking this opportunity lightly and applying our own sort of experiences on top of something or assumptions without actively really seeking out the perspectives of people that are using the types of technology and experiencing the things that we're talking about. So I want to sort of close with one really concrete example. When I was ending my year as an accessibility fellow, Rebecca and I were just kind of talking through some ideas or things that we wanted to continue working on, some opportunities that we thought that we could work on together. And we were having a cup of coffee, and I guess as an important sort of background item, while I work in the School of Business, most of my research interests are around health insurance. And I specifically look at how people learn about health insurance and how they enroll in it and access it. And this was pretty closely tied to Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, most of my research. And at first pass, there wasn't, anything that was specific to accessibility that I was looking at in that. Similarly, Rebecca, with her background in graphic design, probably never thought much about health insurance from a research standpoint. Is that fair to say, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Right. So we were like, okay, what could it look like if we did a mashup of our two research backgrounds? Like what would, or interest, professional backgrounds, what type of study would that look like? And we realized that a really straightforward place to start would be to assess the accessibility of the Obamacare websites that were introduced to help people learn about, enroll in, and gain access to health insurance. So the interesting thing was we thought this was a pretty remarkably cool idea, but we also recognized that it was a pretty heavy lift in terms of work. And both of us being busy, we were like, that's not going to happen unless we've got some student support. So both Rebecca and I each pulled in a student from our own discipline. I brought in a risk management student that has interest in health insurance, and Rebecca brought in one of her graphic design students. And the four of us applied for a faculty student challenge grant. That really the bulk of that money just went to support their hours of work on this. We did have a little bit of additional funding for a few other smaller things. But we were able to, over the course of about, if you include the design of the project, let's say 9 months, design a tool to check the accessibility of all of these different state websites, gain a lot of background in what the states were doing to try and communicate about health insurance. They in many cases had stated goals where they were trying to make health insurance more accessible and affordable to folks. But what we found was really that they had a lot of digital barriers in their way to doing that. So we brought students along on this project. They developed a presentation that they shared digitally. We are working on a manuscript that we are hoping to publish more broadly, as well as some interest in doing some more practice type of publishing to really share the findings and kind of support advocates that are working in this area. So no one in the world has ever thought about like, let's mash up health insurance and accessibility. So this was a really, I think, interesting project for us to work on. I think our students gained a lot out of it. And I think we're really excited to share the findings of it. But Rebecca and I'm not even sure that we would have necessarily thought about doing research together, much less, came up with this idea had we not had this experience. Any thoughts you want to share on our project, Rebecca?
I think the key is like open up conversations about accessibility with your colleagues, because you might be surprised at places where you can find some synergy essentially. And they were surprising, right? Like Michele and I really on the surface don't have a lot in common in terms of research, but we worked on 2 separate projects together. That one just led to another based on each of us had like a primary interest that the other person could really like help kind of fill in the holes with, and it worked out really well. I think we both learned a lot from each other, and it's really fun to work with people in other disciplines. So I certainly highly recommend that piece of it, and really don't overlook the idea of involving students both either in the classroom as part of kind of class activities or thinking more broadly as research assistants.
So I'm going to stop sharing my slides right now. Our hope, let's see, let me stop share here. I think our hope is that because we've just sort of scratched the surface in a really short session today, is that we will in future breakout sessions, probably in the spring, do a longer session that really sort of walks through some of the nuts and bolts of what we've done and some of the types of things that we've leveraged, as well as showcasing some of the other projects that are out there. But we are happy, although we're rapidly running out of time, to answer any questions, either individually or in the accessibility drop-in session later on this afternoon. There are a whole host of upcoming accessibility related sessions today. So we encourage you to keep participating in them with us. And we, I think, are both open to connecting with any faculty who are interested in doing research on this to kind of share some of our ideas, best practices about creating those collaborations. So I think with that, we will wrap up for this session, but hope that people stick around for our upcoming session at 11 a.m., where we will highlight the experiences of another faculty fellow.